Hi there folks, I'm Arran Topalian and welcome back to another episode of Game Design Live. For any newcomers, GDL offers you live interactive design deconstructions of a video game as it's played by a game designer, where we ask questions about a game's design and chat about the potential rationale, pros and cons behind its various design decisions. So if you're into game design in general, or into a certain game and want to understand it better on a design level, this is the place to be. And tonight we're going to be looking at Doom Eternal. As with Hades, Doom is something of a treasure trove of smart game design choices and inclusions and omissions that create its sort of distinctive and immediately recognizable style of first-person shooter combat. And Doom, for me, is an especially incredible example of great game design given the lens it goes to protect players from themselves, which is something that Civilization 4 designers Soren Johnson and Sid Meier have commented on in the past, who said that given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game, and this is something that we brought up in previous episodes. So in other words, one of the responsibilities of designers is to protect the player from themselves and ensure the player plays the game that we want them to play it, and in the way that offers them the best possible experience. I chose Eternal over the previous Doom game, Doom 2016 as it's often referred to, because of some of the elements that Eternal added to the Doom experience since 16 and 16's experience, which are somewhat sort of divisive from a design standpoint, but are all the more interesting because of it. This episode also, just to really quickly call out before we get started, is the first official deep dive episode, which I'm going to be doing once every 2 to 3 weeks, where we really dig into a game's design. More regular episodes will be talk-throughs, where I play a game blind for the first time from start to finish over several weeks, or multiple weeks, or however long it takes me to finish the game, and try to analyze its design as I play it with you. Anyway, thanks for coming along. Let's get started and see how far we get by starting a new save slot. It's important, right? And the first thing that Doom does, this is really interesting, it's not something I see done in other games very often, if at all. When you first launch in the game, or use save slot of the game, it mentions here, to become an unstoppable demon-slaying machine of pure destruction, you will need to master the use of your full arsenal. Each death has something to teach you about Doom Eternal's combat loop. Every new enemy type encourages you to use more of your kit. When in doubt, consult the codex for more information on weapons, demon weaknesses, and upgrades. Good luck, and remember, above all else, never stop moving. Movement is a massive part of Doom's experience. We're going to be talking about it in a bit more detail as we go throughout the episode in terms of why that is the case, why it is maybe that you move at the speed that you move, and how various other aspects of the game facilitate and encourage that and require that. But what's interesting is that Doom, straight off the bat, before it even tries to, Doom goes to a lot of effort to teach you how to play through its gameplay, but they go ahead and just tell you straight up in text as well to really try and make sure that you're aware that this is not your typical kind of first-person shooter. This is something quite different. So I am going to play it on the easiest difficulty. Please don't judge me too hard. The only reason I'm doing this, I feel like I'm having to justify myself here. I don't need to do that, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is that I'm going to be obviously talking throughout the episode, so if it's a bit easier, it stands a better chance of me not dying over and over again, so I get to show you more content, which we all want.
Against all the evil that hell can conjure, all the wickedness that mankind can produce, we will send unto them only you. Rip and tear until it is done.
This is a game I have actually played before, and I'm rather excited to play it again this time around because I have a new TV, so it's going to be really cool to see it kind of far more visually impressive than the first time around that I played it, so it's as much a joy for me as it is for you guys. I don't know what you're watching this on, but what I'm watching on looks amazing.
We must pray now. Pray that he is watching.
Please, anyone, if you can hear me, if you're out there, to acquire the Hell Priest signal.
Nearly 60% of our planet has been consumed by the invaders.
We have the Hell Priest signal locked in. The target is marked, but the signal will not hold for long.
For it is he that they fear, not man, or his armies. They fear the mark of the beast.
So there's a lot happening here in the opening scene of the game. This is not just a kill time, right? The game is very quickly establishing your role in this story world, or what is referred to as a story world, a game world. Strong opening. I'm going to go ahead and turn the volume down a little bit for you guys. I'll just take it down to 25. Cool. So yeah, there's a lot happening in that first opening scene of Doom. What's especially cool about Doom's design is the way that its mechanics and its narrative are so synergized. You're put in the role of Doom Guy, but more than that, you're put into the role of what is essentially an avenging angel. Something furious, something angry, something powerful. It's essentially a power fantasy. But what's especially cool, and what an awful lot of very well-designed games tend to do, is that they synergize their narrative design and their mechanics well, so that not only is the game telling you what you are, you're getting to feel what you are, and it's a far better way to play, it's a far better experience on the whole. It's sort of show, don't tell, but in a game. So, a couple of things straight off the bat, now that we've had the stage set for us, and we'll be given our avatar. And it's one of the questions that I raised in the tweet that went out earlier today, which is that, as you can see in the bottom left corner, we have health. We already took some damage, because I suck, and we're now down to 82 health, but you'll notice that the health is not recharging. So, the first question, like I say, that we asked in the tweet was, why a health bar versus a recharging bar? Why not have it just that the player should be recharging health when not taking damage? And the main reason for this is that it ensures the right behavior from players so that they get the intended experience. Can I go ahead and go this way? I absolutely can. Oh, we're not going to talk about glory kills just yet. We're going to come back to that later. So yeah, as we've spoken about before, game design is really all about cause and effect. We as designers and developers include or omit certain features and mechanics in our games to better ensure players play the way that we want them to play, which is what we would call the intended experience. If a player had recharging health, where, you know, if players would regain lost health if they didn't take damage for end time, it would mean that the game rewards players who periodically avoid combat in order to heal up. Chainsaw, we're also going to talk about Chainsaw, I promise. Oh. So good. Playing at 120 frames per second is the way. Yeah, so it would mean that the game rewards players who periodically avoid combat in order to heal up. Whether that means, you know, retreating from combat or taking cover. And Doom is very much not that kind of game. It's not the way that it wants you to play. So as a result, if players were gifted with recharging health, this would understandably make players far less aggressive, which is not the intended experience. So it's a big reason why health is the way it is in the game. But we're also going to talk a bit about why it offers pickups. Right? There we go. Cool. So yeah, let's circle back around to glory kills now that we've seen glory kills in action. So glory kills might seem straightforward enough. You know, an enemy is sort of shiny, you go up, press a button, do something cool, you feel badass. Nice. But on a design level, they're doing an awful lot more than giving you, you know, joyous amounts of ripping and tearing. And frankly, Doom, as we now know it, wouldn't be the same without them for several sort of reasons. So let's just pick up this little guy first. We're also going to talk about this a little bit at some point if we have time. We're going to go ahead and go with this. Sweet. Yep, great. So yeah, first and foremost, when it comes to glory kills, I want to talk about something called conducive design, which is something we've spoken about in previous episodes in GDL. So Doom is all about what's called push-forward combat, and we're going to go into that a bit more detail later on as well. But the idea is that Doom is designed to encourage players to play aggressively and offensively. And this means that players are in amongst enemies a lot of the time, which also means there's an opportunity for offering the player something else to do other than just keep shooting. There's a different way to interact. It mixes up the gameplay ever so slightly by offering them something a bit more tactile and tactical. And this, as we've discussed before, is a great example of what I refer to as conducive design, where a game's design it sort of expands organically and naturally from other elements or results of its design. So the fact that you're fast moving, you're in combat an awful lot, you're in the thick of it, it seems like a good opportunity to double down on that and offer something else whilst you're in that position. And glory kills are exactly that. So it also helps reinforce and complement the game's narrative design. And again, is another good example of conducive design. As we spoke about, you know, the Doom guy is this sort of avenging angel, this furious avenging angel, so offering the ability to sort of literally just tear your enemies to pieces, again, underlines this role that you're meant to be assuming, rather than someone who's sort of like, you know, running around hiding behind crates to catch their breath and sort of is keeping their distance. I guess what you could say is, you know, in line with the sort of the old saying, we are what we do. In game design, it's no different. You are what you do in a game. So by giving the player the abilities to feel like an avenging angel, they sort of it sort of reinforces the narrative that the game is offering. And I think that, you know, it's one thing to tell a player the role that they're meant to be assuming in the game. It's quite another to feel like that role. You've probably seen this a bunch of times in games where you get different sort of cutscenes that show you how cool you are, or how cool your character is, but then when you actually go into the game, your character can't do nearly all the cool things that can be shown in the cutscene. Wow, this is really easy, isn't it? So yeah, games like Batman Arkham series, or God of War, these are great examples of games that do a great job of showing, not telling. Like in Batman Arkham, you really feel like Batman because of the mechanics that it offers and the experience that it gives. Same goes for God of War, where it also does a good job. I'm now officially out of ammo. I need to go get some more ammo. Is there ammo? There's this. So another... I'm just going to go with the sound actually a little bit more in a sec. Let's just take care of these guys first. We've got time. We've got the 50 minutes or so. Okay, let's try that. So yeah, the next thing I want to talk about with regard to glory kills are movement patterns. So it's interesting to note that when an enemy is stunned in a glory kill state, you've seen it a couple of times already in this playthrough so far, where the enemy sort of assumes a very kind of staggered, dazed looking animation. They're flashing orange and white. But they're also static, so they don't move around the battlefield. Which, in all fairness, they could have done, right? Like, why not? The game is all about staying on the move, so why is it that glory kill state enemies don't do that? And I think there's a couple of reasons as to why that might be, from a design perspective. Doom is, without question, still a game all about movement, and it's the enemies that encourage this movement. But it's not always just mindless, straightforward movement. It's not just usually a case of just, like, you know, aimlessly wandering about the field and dodging attacks. There's something slightly more sort of nuanced going on, even if we don't quite recognize it at first. I'm not going to go in there just yet because it's a bit of story. I'm going to finish my point first, then we're going to go and see the story. So many enemies encourage what's referred to as movement patterns, which is quite common in action games. So these are different optimal ways to move in order to deal with different problems. So for example, imps, these sort of like little demon-looking creatures you probably saw before throwing fireballs. Because they throw fireballs that bounce, that requires us to strafe. And we have plenty of time to strafe because these are physical entities that they're throwing. Or Hell Knights, which are another enemy. They're more like bulls that chase you. and come right up into your face, and because of that you have to sort of reverse while shooting. And you'll notice also when you play Doom that the speed at which you move forward and reverse is, I think, the exact same, which I think is an intentional aspect of design on Doom's part, because it wants you to be able to stay on the move but keep turning and keep moving at the same speed regardless of where you're facing. So the speed at which you move is the same regardless of whether you're going left to right, strafing, or forward and backwards. So yeah, different enemies encourage different movement patterns. So in other words, many enemies in Doom are like magnets, right? So some push, others pull, and they push and pull to varying degrees. And glory kills pull hard because they're relatively safe to interact with. They're opportunities for players to make a beeline, basically, right toward a something. So it's another sort of movement pattern to include in the combat to keep the player moving in different ways, in meaningful ways, rather than just random. And last but not least, it helps enemies in that state stand out in a very hectic battlefield even more for easier identification, right? If something isn't moving in an environment where everything is moving, it stands out even more. So the end result is the player is offered beeline movement opportunities, which is made further enticing by the fact that glory kills offer health, which is going to bring us on to another point in just a second, right after we check out this little cutscene. And I chainsaw the door.
My soul remains guarded. You can.
Just gotta fix that. Cool. So yeah, I think another aspect of glory kills that's worth calling out is they're sort of a call to return to the fray. So as we discussed before, your health in Doom doesn't recharge over time. You need to either pick up health packs, which again are essentially another type of magnet on the battlefield. They're something that encourages players to be pulled toward them if and when you need them. It's another place to go to in a meaningful way. Or you can execute glory kills to regain your health. So in order to stay alive during a fight, assuming you've used up all the health packs nearby, the only other way to stay alive is to fight. There's no other alternative, which again sort of reinforces that push forward combat aspect. All right, let's go ahead and take this. Do I take this? Oh, okay. It also adds a much needed element of risk versus reward, which is a very common aspect of most games, particularly games that are sort of targeted at maybe slightly more mature, hardcore audiences as opposed to younger audiences. So yeah, when choosing whether or not to do a glory kill, a lot of the time a player will naturally ask themselves a few questions very quickly, and we're talking seconds, if even that. Namely, if it's worth the risk. So, is it safe for me to move to that spot and execute a glory kill? So by choosing to do a glory kill, the player is sort of choosing to risk being flanked or quickly surrounded by nearby enemies. Okay. So yeah, in other words, it offers players, sorry, just punch my headset at the same time. It offers players another layer of choice during combat that in turn raises the skill ceiling of the game. And skill ceilings are something we've talked about in previous episodes. And every opportunity for choice and combat ability contributes to that in a game to varying degrees, and offers in turn even more room for mastery, which in turn again further encourages continued engagement with the game. So it's a way to keep players playing because there's room for improvement. So yeah, and what else is quite cool, it's not so much a deconstruction. What I do think is cool is the fact that glory kills support omnidirectional functionality, and the way their UX works is fantastic. So you'll see there that when we first got the enemy into a glory kill state, they flash blue, but then when you're in a certain proximity to them, they flash orange. So the game is telling you very clearly and subtly, not so subtly I suppose, is that you are now not only in range of this enemy is not only just in a glory kill state, but you're now also in range of doing something to the enemy in that state. But yeah, what's cool is that the glory kill changes depending on the direction that you approach the enemy from, which is pretty impressive considering the amount of extra animation that probably added to the game. But it's very cool and really helps with the immersion in a big way, rather than just sort of like snapping you instantly in front of the enemy, for example, which would have been another way to go. What's also interesting is, we noticed there just a second ago, that glory kill state doesn't last forever. So in a sense, it's sort of like obolites from Returnal, which we talked about in an episode or 2 or 3 or 4 perhaps, I've lost all sense of time ago, where obolites in Returnal are sort of like the soft currency that you collect, but what's interesting is that they dissipate after being on the ground for so long. And the reason that we talked about why that might be the case is because it encourages players to get closer into the fight and come and collect those obolites before they get lost. And again, glory kills are no exception there, I think. So yeah, glory kills. We like glory kills. Can I just jump down here? Yeah. So we're going to talk a bit more about push-forward combat. It's a major part of the game. I've mentioned it a couple of times already, and I think it would be good to elaborate on it a little bit. So to give you guys a bit of backstory, for push-forward combat, originally Doom 16's combat was similar to other first-person shooters, in the sense that most enemies pursued the player aggressively or chased the player. And id started to develop a very different version of the game that was far more story-heavy, and was actually later referred to quite charmingly as Call of Doom, given how much it was inspired by the Call of Duty franchise and similar shooters. And in line with other shooters, like COD, the game's AI would run straight at the player, aggressively kind of closing the distance. And this meant that players would often end up in situations where they'd instantly start sort of backing up or reversing, which is fairly normal behavior for us as humans in general, right? Like if we're confronted by a threat, we tend to sort of retreat. You know, we tend to enter a fight or flight state, and a lot of the time we'll opt for flight as the safer option. And this is only exacerbated in games. Hence, you know, you get things like we're also going to talk about weak points in a second, but not just yet. So yeah, hence we have things like the door problem in games, which again we've talked about in previous episodes. And the challenge with game design, missed that. Amazing aim. The challenge of game design is the fact that you're sort of presenting a supercomputer, you know, i.e. the brain, with a problem to solve, and oftentimes the brain will basically just simply deduce the most effective way of solving that problem. So if you're surrounded by enemies on all sides, and by things closing in, the typical response is to play defensively and smartly, arguably smartly, by using either a choke point or backing yourself into a corner so you can see everything kind of coming at you. Let's take these things out real quick. Yeah. You'll see that I'm just constantly moving as well, as is everything else. We're also going to talk a little bit about the fact that you've probably seen it a few times now, that enemies visually look damaged when they take damage. So you'll see, you know, like bits of them falling off, or their guts being exposed, all that good stuff. And it's an improvement from Doom 2016, which I don't think did do that. And I think it adds a couple of things on a design level, but we're going to come to that later in the episode. Where's the last one? You'll also notice there's no radar. Like in games like Returnal, for example, there is a mini-map or a radar on the bottom of the screen. Doom, they didn't choose to do that. Which I guess, again, encourages movement, right? Like you're, rather than just sort of like honing in on enemies, you're sort of, it adds a degree of franticness to the game where you're having to turn and look and move far more often because you actually don't know where enemies are from a bird's eye view level. And it also means that you're never ever looking anywhere else other than the center of the screen. You tend to find that games that include mini-maps, a lot of the time the player's eye will spend a lot of time in that tiny little corner of the screen because, again, it's the most effective way of playing the game. It's the safest way of playing the game. In Doom, no mini-map. You're very much focused on the task at hand. So yeah, the Call of Doom version of the project actually ended up being cancelled completely, which resulted in a restart of the project that put the game on the path that we now know Doom to be. So instead, demons, melee demons excluded, would actually, or do actually, hold their position. Quite typically, they sort of hold their position, they don't tend to chase the player, and melee demons are used, or were used, far more wisely and sparingly in order to create what has been referred to in the past by the developers as combat chess, which is a term I really, really like. So by having demons hold their ground longer than before, the design basically put an awful lot more of an impetus and a motivation on players to move in on enemy positions and move to enemy positions. Like to quote from an article, I will be sure to cite the article in the notes of the episode. But yeah, to quote, the player was now the one initiating or picking their way through the arena and through the space, which is a quote from Stratton. So yeah, this often resulted in players having to fall back and play defensively as well as offensively once this sort of push-forward combat was installed a little bit more. And like we talked about, you know, there's a sort of show-don't-tell factor to it, which again is where Glory Kills do quite a great job. You know, the sort of that sacred rule in writing of show-don't-tell. And what's particularly cool about Doom is that this playstyle very much again reinforces the role that you're meant to be assuming. If you're just tuning in now, if you're watching the VOD or if you're watching this on YouTube, welcome to GDL. This is the one and only deep dive episode on Doom Eternal. If you're enjoying the content, please do give the channel a follow, or you can check out my Twitter, which is @AH_Topalian, where you can also follow. I tend to keep it full of all sorts of good, juicy game design related news and articles. I like to stay well informed because it's my job, so if that's your kind of thing, then please do check it out. Come on now. You'll see here that also this enemy had a weak point on it. So when it was a ranged enemy, you probably saw that it was kind of holding its ground fairly frequently. It didn't tend to move. Now that it doesn't have that option, it's actually closing the distance with us constantly. That's exactly what it wants to do. What's also quite interesting is the fact that you're given a shotgun. I mean, it's not that, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? Like, it's a very close range kind of game, so a shotgun makes perfect sense. But what's also cool is the fact that you can probably see me quite often kind of doing this thing where I'm kind of like running right up to an enemy, blasting them, and then running backwards again. So again, we have what's called meaningful movement, where the player is moving in a specific pattern because of the way the enemies are designed and the way the weapons function. Can I pick that up? I should really use the chainsaw more often. So another question that we raised earlier in the episode is, why does the player move at the speed at which they do? Why are we so fluid? And the push-forward combat is definitely part of it, but you know, the movement in general, it provides the game with a pace and intensity. But the question is, you know, why not Dark Souls? Why not just make the player, rather than make the player very fast, why not go for something else entirely? Why not go for something maybe, you know, slower, but still capable? So long as enemy attacks are anticipated well enough, you should be fine. Which is just as intense. For anyone who's played Dark Souls, it's a very intense, challenging experience. With its own sort of like unique level of skill ceiling. Oh, where's that coming from? There we go, that's where it's coming from. So firstly, I think it's important to say that the game's style of movement sort of harkens back to the original Doom of 1993. So it's likely the developers wanted to retain the original game's core feel, which would have been important to fans of the franchise. And I think when you're dealing with an IP, especially an IP that's popular, it's important to respect the heritage of the IP that you're handling. But even then, the question still kind of stands, like, why did the original Doom offer the kind of movement that it did, right? Like, why did it choose to do things the way it chose to do things? And obviously there's no hard answer here. I'm purely speculating as a designer and as a player. What the heck? It may be that it may have been that, you know, it just felt right through playtesting, which can sometimes happen, but I would also speculate that the pace of a game is very much driven by other factors. So Dark Souls is right enough an intense experience like Doom, but it's intense for different reasons. You tend to have the game itself, well, the game itself is far more about exploration. Whoops. Oh, well, that wasn't very badass. Try that again. Yeah, the game is far more about exploration, tentatively exploring an environment. So in turn, slower movement with a far more sort of like emphasis on being careful makes a lot more sense. Whereas with Doom, it's far more focused on the genre of game. The genre, I would say, is what really drives it and requires a different kind of pace in general. How do I do this? That's not to say that a Dark Souls like Doom couldn't be interesting. Maybe it would be interesting. But I do think that genre has a big part to play in it, where because of the exploration factor in Dark Souls, it changes the landscape for the kind of pace and movement that you can offer players. I think it's also interesting to maybe kind of peel out the fact that fast movement in Doom facilitates survivability. So as long as you remember to keep moving, you'll usually be fine. Which in turn encourages movement, which in turn heightens engagement, and in my opinion to some degree sort of almost aids with approachability. It's not a game that requires very kind of twitchy reflexes, or well, I guess it does in later stages, but I wouldn't say it requires sort of twitchy aim in the way that maybe other games do, like Call of Duty, or I think Call of Duty is maybe the best one I can offer right now, to be honest, without kind of getting too into the weeds on other games. But yeah, a lot of the time, as long as you keep moving, you're pretty much okay. So, you know, in Doom, because it doesn't require twitchy aiming, which involves 2 sticks rather than just moving right up to an enemy and blasting it in the face, that only involves 1 stick. So, you know, 1 less stick to have to really kind of like master makes it a little bit easier to get to grips with, perhaps, and it feels a little bit less fiddly to play. What's really cool is that traps can also affect enemies, so your players are given a sort of an opportunity to play smart here. And not just here, but elsewhere in the game.
The cleansing of Earth is a necessary step on the path to a
Oh,
brighter
of course you're there.
Thanks to the UAC Hell Merger Initiative, humanity can now reach full potential.
Really? So we've seen like 3 different enemies now in Doom. There are obviously a few more, and hopefully we're going to see a couple more as we play. But what you've probably noticed so far is that every enemy is extremely distinct in terms of its design. They're all very different. So the question is why? Why did Doom design its enemies to be that way? Why is everything so different? And why do they all boast very different attacks? Why do they boast somewhat different behaviors? And this is something known as orthogonal unit differentiation, which we're going to talk about more now. So Matthias Warch, the Mafia 3 design director, quoted saying, "The reason Doom works so well is because each enemy represents a distinct, consistent, and discernible behavior that can be learned." And this is what Deus Ex designer Harvey Smith refers to as orthogonal unit differentiation. Can I do this here? Oh, I had to switch weapon. This one's good. What's cool as well about these weapon upgrades, you'll see there I just picked a precision bolt. Totally changing subject. I'll come back around to orthogonal unit differentiation in a sec. I knew I wasn't going to be able to say that fast. Is that the weapon upgrades offer different types of mastery as well. So we've just picked the precision bolt there for this gun, which is called the heavy cannon. Thank you, UI. And here we have a situation where we move, I think, very slightly slower, but our aim is called upon. We're called to be a far better shot. So if you're a good shot in general, this gun, or this upgrade rather, offers you the opportunity to reap the benefits of that. Or if you're willing to get good at aim, then again, you're offered the opportunity to reap the rewards of that. So it's different ways of not only does it allow players a certain degree of autonomy, and it allows for a bit more customization of your guns, it also caters for different types of player, and it also, again, raises that skill ceiling. But yeah, so, as we were saying, Deus Ex designer Harvey Smith refers to this type of enemy design as orthogonal unit differentiation. So different enemies in the game have completely different attributes, rather than just sort of being, you know, more or lesser difficult or powerful versions of each other. Can I make that? Whoa. Which means then there's again, more room for mastery in the sense that your skill ceiling is raised, there's more to learn about the game. It also means that it creates something of a prioritization minigame. We're going to talk about prioritization in Doom a bit more in just a second. And it also means then that your weapon design can tap into this type of enemy design. So because each enemy is distinct, it also means that it has different strengths and weaknesses, which can be complemented by the different weapons in the game and their strengths and weaknesses. So while the shotgun might be perfect against something like this thing, which is quite weak, but very in your face. If we were to come up against, you know, a Mancubus, I think they're called, which I don't know if we'll see in this episode. These things are huge, very big targets, but very slow moving. So something like that, you might want to use a rocket launcher because they're not going to move very fast. They're not going to move very fast. It's unlikely they're going to dodge your rockets, and rockets do very high damage, which is just as well because these Mancubus enemies have very high health. So because the enemies are designed in this way, it creates a scenario or a situation where players can sort of learn subtle, hidden, optimal solutions in the game, which feels good. Like frankly put, simply put, it just feels good to feel like you're figuring things out for yourself, when in actual fact the game had those answers there all along. It was just waiting for you to come across them. And it also means as well that, you know, it allows the game to offer some additional layers of UX. So because there's different enemies, very different enemies, each of them can offer very unique sound effects, which is all important for a game like this especially, or in general for very fast-paced manic games. Overwatch is another good example. And just to say, we are now 4 followers off of the bonus Overwatch episode. We are now 4 followers away from a 50 follower milestone, and once we hit that milestone, I'm going to be doing a bonus Overwatch episode the following week, where we're going to be looking at a deep dive on Overwatch. Like I say, 4 followers. So close, guys. So yeah, in fast-paced games, sound design is extremely important in regards to UX. There we go. And you'll also notice that the sound design as well, in general, for Doom, sound effects tend to be very short and very clear. So they're much like attack telegraphing, which we've talked about in previous episodes. They are cues to tell the player danger is coming or danger is near, which is particularly handy when you're not in a third-person game and you don't have quite the same field of view that you might have in a third-person game, or otherwise, you know, anything beyond your viewport is practically invisible and therefore doesn't exist, and you might just completely forget about it. And being hit by an enemy that sort of snuck up on you typically doesn't feel very good. So yeah, super important. And definitely a benefit of orthogonal unit differentiation. Let's finish these guys off. Armor. Oh, there you go, another one. Okay. Oh, how much more? So yeah, let's talk a bit about prioritization. It's a major part of Doom's experience. So every combat encounter in Doom requires players to not only avoid and inflict damage, but there's also something of a mini-game going on, which players are doing and calculating on the fly on a second-to-second basis, where they're trying to figure out which problems to deal with first to overcome the overall problem, which is surviving, in the best possible way. And this is what's referred to often as combat puzzles. So what's most interesting about combat puzzles is that the answer to this equation, and it is essentially an equation, changes dynamically and very often and potentially on a second-to-second basis, depending on things like your position, enemy positions, weapons that are available, enemies present, environmental hazards, and so on. So as your weapon variety increases and as your enemy variety increases, so too does the number of different combat puzzles that you can present the player with, and in turn your replayability factor goes up, and in turn hopefully your engagement goes up as a result, because there's more to be seen and experienced in the game, and it doesn't feel like you're playing the same thing over and over again, and there's more opportunity to get better, which are all things that we've talked about previously. Where's it gone? So yeah, if you can imagine for a second another equation that can be applied to each enemy, which factors in its abilities, its health, its damage, and all of these different things added up produce what you'd call a priority value, which is not something player facing. There we go. That felt good. I have no ammo. No, I have ammo. There we go. Yeah, so priority values. So for example, between a zombie and a pain demon or a hell knight or whatever else, it's pretty clear between the zombie and the hell knight which of those two is the more pressing problem, right? Because the latter is right up in your face, or the pain demon can actually spawn new enemies. So it's almost a no-brainer, intentionally so a no-brainer, because it's more grokkable and understandable for a player to figure out and feel like they figured it out on their own, rather than being told by the game. And these priority values apply to every enemy. And although they can't be seen, for obvious reasons, they can be felt and understood by the player over varying degrees of time, depending on obviously the skill level and sort of familiarity of the player is at with games in general. This is something for them to sort of figure out and get a feel for, which is yet again another form of mastery. But prioritization in Doom is a huge part of the experience, where you're having to sort of like run between different enemies and, like I say, figure out on the fly which enemies to take out first and in which order and with what tool, like which tool's right for given jobs. Which again comes down to that orthogonal unit differentiation, which we were talking about before. You've probably seen a couple of times as well that I've been using this badass chainsaw. It is badass. Let's be clear for a second. It's totally badass. And this kind of taps into the resource management factor of Doom. So again, there's sort of another mini game going on in the background when you're playing Doom, which is not only the prioritization factor, but there's resource management involved. And as with everything else in Doom, it always reinforces the core combat of the game, which is that push forward combat. Yeah. The fact that you can jump after you've glory killed an enemy is very cool. It almost allows you to sort of like air juggle different enemies. And there's a very nice bit of detail. Can I just... Where do I go from... Is it that way? I gotta get up there. How do I get up there? Am I just being really stupid? How the heck do I get up there? Oh, well that was easy. I was making that far harder for myself than it had to be. So yeah, let's talk about resource management. So yeah, in Doom, weapons, as you can see, don't have a clip, right? You can see that in the bottom right corner of the screen. It's just a number with no magazine clip whatsoever. There's just ammo capacity and nothing else. So by omitting a clip, by not having a clip present, players only have to focus really on two things during Doom's highly frenetic combat, which is moving and shooting, but also, like I say, prioritization, which is part of moving and shooting. So this means that players can essentially stay more absorbed on these actions and in the combat and the threats in front of them without having to spare precious attention on things like ammo clips. It also means that there's not a sort of break in the combat. Like, there's never a break where you're having to pause for a second and reload and then get back into the fight. The fight is just continual with no pauses or breaks because of something inconvenient like an ammo clip. And lastly, we talked about, push forward combat. I think another big part of the reason why no clip is included is exactly because push forward combat and clips would not go particularly well together, right? Like, if you've ever played any other kind of first-person shooter, you'll probably find that when you go to reload your gun, you'll look for cover. You'll look for something to hide behind and reload your weapon. And again, that's not what Doom wants from the player. It's not how it wants you to play. Therefore, clips are just omitted from the design. I would say, though, that I do think that Eternal maybe took resource management to the extreme ever so slightly. Like, there are a few different ways that Eternal requires players to engage with resource management. So things like the Flame Belch, for example, which you get later on in the game and is used to generate armor. It basically just means that as a result, you're spending a bit more focus and attention sort of topping up your resources rather than focusing on the combat. What's also interesting, actually, while we're on the subject of ammo, is the fact that there's different ammo for different weapons. So it's not like there's just there's just ammo, generic ammo. There is specific ammo, I think, for each and every single weapon. Oh, this is going to be a harder fight, and it's going to be tougher to talk. Maybe just mop up a few things here, and then we'll get back to it. So yeah, I think that part of the reason why guns do this, ammo does this in the game specifically, is that it means the player has to think a bit more when using certain weapons, right? So while the BFG, which is the most powerful weapon in the game, and is arguably the most powerful weapon in the game, since it functions pretty much like a nuclear bomb, its ammo is also extremely, extremely rare, which kind of turns it into something of an emergencies only weapon. So it has a clear purpose simply because of the frequency ammo for it is given out and the power of the weapons. These two things combined give the player enough hints and clues as to what this weapon is intended to be used as, which is an emergency button. And in turn, players will typically, hoard that ammo until they feel like they really need it, whether they're surrounded by enemies or they're very low on health and they really don't want to die. So it adds a clear purpose to the weapon with, again, not telling the player explicitly this is what this weapon is for. So I would say that the way they've done ammo reinforces the purpose and facility. Is that the right word? Let's go with purpose. Let's just stick with purpose, nice and simple. The purpose or intended purpose of the weapons that are offered. There's one more. There you are. We can also ask, why the weapons are designed the way they are. There's sort of several weapons in Doom, and like the enemies, each of them functions in a very different way. And as we've seen, there are different types of enemy in the game, where some are sort of fast-moving and quite weak, and others are slow but incredibly tough. And for each of these distinct problems, Doom offers a solution in the form of a weapon. So it's much like a tool for a different DIY project, right? It's a tool for a different problem. And it's up to the players over time to identify which tools are best suited to different kinds of problems and scenarios. Nice. If I could just have like a Doom game combined with Destiny, that would be fine. I'd really like that. Can someone make that? Oh no. Oh, okay. Oh wow, okay. Let's just load that up. So yeah, we talked about this before, right? So, for example, the Mancubus is slow and tough, which makes the rocket launcher a particularly great weapon to take into that kind of fight. And it might sound obvious when said out loud, but for a new player, this realization can really make them feel powerful and smart. The way to think about game design, the way I often think about game design when working on my own projects, is that game design is a bit like doing an easy magic trick, right? So you want your audience to feel good about themselves when they figure out the solution to your trick, because that was your intention all along. But you don't want to tell them that, because then that spoils the sense of feeling good about it. But that to me is a big part of what game design really is. Oh, come on. Let's try and get past this. What I particularly love about Doom as well is the weapon wheel that it offers players. So you'll notice, let's just check this out for a quick second. If I press and hold the, oh, maybe not. I'll do it anyway. Don't need to fight. So if we open up the weapon wheel, you'll notice that the game doesn't quite pause. It slows right down, which is a really nice piece of UX on the developer's part. The fact that it gives players just a bit of a chance to think about which weapon is the right thing to pick for the current situation they're in, without pausing the action, so it doesn't feel like you're being ripped out of the experience. But it does give you an opportunity to stop and think for, I think for as long as you need actually. Let's just press the button and see what happens. Yeah, this just looks continual. And I actually have complete movement as well. Like I can still move in any direction I want while this wheel is open, and it's continual. So I can do this for as long as I like. The only thing I can't do is I can't shoot. But yeah, you essentially get bullet time forever. That's quite interesting. Wow. But what's also interesting is the fact that it's color-coded, which again is a nice piece of UX. So obviously accessibility is definitely something to consider there. It would have been quite nice to maybe offer some sort of like, I guess you have the pictures there, so you can still see exactly what you're picking anyway. But otherwise, the color does help kind of like quickly indicate or call out which is which in the wheel, which you can pick up and learn over time. Even the position of the wheel is quite interesting. The fact that it's on the right side of the screen, and it just so happens that you use the right stick to navigate the wheel. So from an interaction standpoint, that's nice and intuitive. But also it's placed on the right side of the screen, so it's not right in the middle of the screen like maybe it could have been otherwise. So it's not blocking your view of the action, while still being big enough that it gives you enough of a sense of what you're picking. We may have to do a 1.5 episode after this episode, because we're still not quite into all the different things we wanted to talk about, so I might break my own rule and do a little half-hour episode next week to finish off on Doom Eternal, because there's still stuff I wanted to talk about, namely the Marauder, which I know is a very divisive topic, and I do want to talk about in a bit more detail. But in the next 6 minutes, it's going to be a bit of a tight call. I should be just going through the door, actually, shouldn't I? So we did call out the fact that enemies take damage, like they visibly take damage from your gunshots as you play. And I did promise that we were going to talk about it, so I'm going to do exactly that. It's the last thing we're going to talk about, and then we're going to let you guys go and enjoy the rest of your evening. So this kind of taps into the importance and role of feedback in game design. So games are all about feedback. It's arguably the most important and fundamental aspect of game design, and what separates games in general as a medium from other forms of media. You know, it's press a button, something happens. Something happening that you can clearly notice. And this is arguably the key kind of joy of games, alongside things like, you know, mastery and progression and all that kind of good stuff. So the amount of feedback and types of feedback offered by a game typically varies depending on the audience of the game. or the audience that the game is intended for. And to some extent can actually play a big part in determining the game's resulting audience in and of itself. So not only does the amount of feedback your game feature, not only should it be sort of driven by your audience, but depending on what you end up with, it can actually in turn drive the audience as well. So they're sort of kind of symbiotic together. And in Doom 2016, bigger demons didn't feature this functionality. And as a result, I would say that maybe demons felt very much like a bit like bullet sponges in a way. Like there was no way of knowing how close an enemy was to death. There was no sort of feedback in that front whatsoever. So Doom Eternal sort of fixes that with these sort of destructible demons. The more damage they are, the more vulnerable they look, and that allows the player also to make more informed decisions in combat. If you know that something's close to death, then you're maybe more likely to get in close to that enemy and finish it off, because it's one less problem on the battlefield. So it allows players to make, again, even smarter decisions on a second-to-second basis. It's essentially sort of like a health bar. In one of the previous episodes we did on Death's Door, Death's Door did something kind of similar, where enemies sort of crack and show pink lines across their body as they take damage. I would say that sort of, you know, Doom's answer to that is seeing blood and guts. Of course it is. So yeah, all the things we've talked about, you know, essentially kind of conjure what is Doom's very compelling core combat loop, and is essentially what the entire game rests upon. We talked about core combat loops in previous episodes, but to just offer a little bit of a refresher, core combat loops, or core loops for that matter, is the game loop that the player is executing on a moment-to-moment basis. It's the most basic fundamental interaction the player has with your game. There's other kinds of loop in the game. For example, there's meta loops that relate to how players are looking to progress in your game outside of combat or outside of the core experience. And in Doom, all the things that we've kind of talked about, and then some of the stuff we're going to talk about in the next episode when that comes along, all those things sort of distill into this core combat loop, which I would say consists of three main steps. First of all is identify the biggest threat to myself, or the most imminent threat, or I guess you would even phrase it slightly differently. Identify the next main problem, because a lot of the time it might be that the next thing you target isn't necessarily the biggest threat. It could just be something that that makes the most sense to kill straight away, like an exploding enemy, for example, that can allow you to kill loads of enemies at once if you hit it when it's standing next to its mates. So that's the first step. Identify then how best to eliminate that threat. So once you've chosen a target, the next question the players ask themselves, again on that second-to-second basis, is which weapon do I want, which tool do I want to pick to solve this problem, which one makes the most sense, both on an efficiency level as well as a resource management level. And then third and finally, the player is having to identify how to resupply to continue eliminating threats, which is where things like the chainsaw come in, and the flame belch, for example, which allow players to resupply. So yeah, we did actually talk about that a little bit. So the chainsaw, you know what, we're not going to rush it. Let's talk about the chainsaw next time. So yeah, I think it's an extremely strong combat loop as a result, or core combat loop as a result. And the fact that enemies are orthogonally differentiated also means, on top of the sound effects distinctions that it offers, it also means that each enemy can be very clearly silhouetted. Silhouetting is quite a common term in the game industry, where if you were to take an enemy's image and make it 2D and black, how easy is it for the player to identify one from another, especially at a distance, and even more so when things are very chaotic and hectic. Overwatch does this to a great degree. If you look at any of Overwatch's heroes, they all have very distinct silhouettes, and as is the case in Doom Eternal.
How can this be? No man can pass through the gate. This stops nothing. The sacrament of this world to the great Khan Maker.
And that concludes the, as it turns out, first episode on Doom Eternal, or the deep dive on Doom Eternal. We're probably going to do another 30-minute episode sometime next week. So if you're interested in finding out more about Doom Eternal, do be sure to tune in for that. As for the next episode in general, we're going to be looking at Psychonauts 2 next Monday, same place, same time, 9 to 10, BEST. That's going to be a talk-through episode, so we're going to be starting it from scratch. I've never played it before, so we're going to be playing it together live and breaking down and analysing the design as we go. But it's likely that the following Wednesday, next Wednesday, we'll do the second part on Doom Eternal. And again, like I say, if you have enjoyed the content, do please give the channel a follow, do please check out my Twitter or my YouTube page, which has also got a few other episodes that are no longer on my Twitch now as VODs. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and thank you very much for watching and coming along.